Morning, everybody.
Hey, man.
So, Heidi, whiplash, maybe.
Well, you just stole my word.
Well, it may be the word of the day. We're following the president down this trail of, yes, they targeted, no, they didn't. The president, Putin, offered strong, powerful denials, so I take him at his word. He said in Helsinki. Where are we in all this? Or are we just back where we began, which is that, yes, we believe the intelligence agencies when they say that there was interference in the 2016 election, and President Trump just doesn't want to say clearly that it happened?
I have to say, for one of the first times, I really had flashback to the very beginning of this presidency when on Inauguration Day, I was standing on the route for his motorcade, and it was raining. We were all in ponchos, and the president said, "The sun is out." The sun was not out. He's asking us to not believe our own eyes when we see him say these things. We see him speak the words, and then the White House tells us that that's not what they meant. That's not what happened. And so I think they're doing a very messy job of cleanup. And if the goal here is to protect the president's reputation and his integrity and his election victory, they're doing the exact opposite. But I will tell you what's happening that is very disturbing, which is there was just a poll out yesterday that showed that only 35% of Republicans believe that there was actually Russian election meddling. So the confusion and the exhaustion that this is creating in the populace is real.
And those same Republicans believe that the investigation into it is a distraction, taking again the president's narrative on this. Let's explain what we're talking about here. The White House tried to move past the fallout from the Helsinki summit, but this moment from the president's cabinet meeting yesterday started it all over again.
Is Russia still targeting the U.S.? Is Russia still targeting the U.S., Mr. President?
Press,
let's go. Make your way out. No, you don't believe that to be the case? Let's go. We're finished here.
Senator Schumer said you were walking back.
Press, let's go.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Make your way out. Can you just
We're doing very well. We are doing very well, and we're doing very well, probably as well as anybody has ever done with Russia.
You had a chance to speak with the president after those comments, and the president said thank you very much and was saying no to answering questions.
So he does believe it's going on.
Well, since there's currently not an election today, not specifically.
So despite the video that shows the president looking at Cecilia and answering no to this question about whether Russia is still targeting the U.S., and despite multiple people in the room understanding that the president was responding to that question, and despite the president having never before said the word no, no repeatedly to usher reporters out of the room, you're saying it's a reverse. You're saying the president said this is
the first thing that the president said after the question was asked was thank you very much, and then he said no, I'm not answering any more questions. And even further, I think even Cecilia didn't realize what the answer was because she asked for clarification and he didn't answer the follow-up. I talked to the president. He wasn't answering that question. He was saying no, he's not taking questions.
Now, this is the second time in 3 days that the president of the White House has come out and reversed what the president has said. To the opposite of what it was
I'm interpreting what the president said. I'm not reversing it.
The opposite way. Why
I was in the room as well, and I didn't take it the way you did. I was interpreting what the president's intention was.
So the White House's official transcript of the meeting shows the president responding no to the question, is Russia still targeting the U.S., and no to the follow-up question asking for clarification by the reporter who was inside that room. Rick Tyler, we're playing semantic games again here, but we know where the president stands because he stood up on a stage next to the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, and stated pretty clearly where he stands.
Well, he did in all the context surrounding it, and the would to wouldn't and not to not, and now we're arguing over whether no means yes or yes means no, or then going on to actually answer a question in the way he did means I'm not taking questions. The president received an intelligence briefing from the previous administration when he came into office, and he convinced himself in that meeting when he was shown that the Russians, this is the New York Times David Sanger story, he was convinced they were trying to convince him that the Russians actually interfered in the election, that Putin was directly responsible for it. And he seemed marginally convinced. But subsequent to that, he convinced himself that this was a great conspiracy, this was a great plot by the Obama administration to convince him that he didn't actually win the election, it was all illegitimate, and that the Russians actually interfered in a way that made him the president, and therefore he was an illegitimate president. He has so convinced himself of that narrative, he's never been able to let it go. So, and that resulted last week in the disastrous meeting with Vladimir Putin, who is a trained KGB agent.
I actually think that's a generous explanation.
I think
so
because
because his obsequiousness towards Putin has predated
that briefing, which happened.
No, I don't disagree with it. There remains two great mysteries. What happened in the meeting and what's on Donald Trump's tax returns, and I think they're related.
Yeah.
Well, so Gene Robinson, just to go back to the Sanger piece that's in the New York Times today, there was a briefing given on January 6, 2017. The president's 2 weeks away from his inauguration inside Trump Tower with the highest-ranking intelligence officials in the United States, laying out chapter and verse in very clear terms how President Putin himself directed cyber attacks during the election.
Read the story. They not only gave him the sort of well-documented evidence, some of it came from a super secret source close to Putin, so secret that the existence of the source was not even contained in President Obama's presidential daily brief. It was restricted to an even tighter circle.
Right.
Just the president and a few other people knew of the source's existence. Donald Trump was told in no uncertain terms by the highest-ranking intelligence officials, the people who know all the secrets that there are to be known, that it was Putin, that it was him personally who directed this. And, you know, to Rick's point, is the president delusional or is the president just simply lying? And that's not exactly, I mean, it's not mutually exclusive, but I think he's lying. He's lying. You can't, I mean.
We're all talking about the aftermath of the summit because of all these antics, because of the back and forth, the N''T, would versus wouldn't. We're talking about, it's really asinine in my opinion. What all that matters is the image that we all saw of Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump on Monday, and what Donald Trump said at that press conference, what Vladimir Putin said, and the strength that Putin projected, and then Donald Trump looking just like a fanboy to an autocrat. And I go back to, I don't know if y'all watched SNL this election season, but Bernie Sanders was played by Larry David, and Larry David is one of my favorite comedians, but he would get so amused with himself that he would start laughing sometimes as he would do the skit. That was literally Putin as Donald Trump was talking about election meddling. He just lost the KBG. If you go back and you watch it without sound, just his body language, Putin just can't believe what is happening.
There was a lot of smirking from the president of Russia. So yesterday, President Trump sat down for a second interview with Jeff Glor of CBS. This was after all this no, what did he actually say, what did he mean? Here's what he told Jeff Glor yesterday.
You say you agree with U.S. intelligence that Russia meddled in the election in 2016.
Yeah, and I've said that before, Jeff. I have said that numerous times before. And I would say that that is true, yeah.
But you haven't condemned Putin specifically. Do you hold him personally responsible?
Well, I would, because he's in charge of the country, just like I consider myself to be responsible for things that happen in this country. So certainly, as the leader of a country, you would have to hold him responsible, yes.
What'd you say to him?
Very strong on the fact that we can't have meddling, we can't have any of that. Now, look, we're also living in a grown-up world. Will a strong statement, President Obama supposedly made a strong statement. Nobody heard it.
But he denies it. So if you believe U.S. intelligence agencies, is Putin lying to you?
I don't want to get into whether or not he's lying. I can only say that I do have confidence in our intelligence agencies as currently constituted. I think I did great at the news conference. I think it was a strong news conference. I think we did extremely well, and I think the press makes up the fight. Look, it's fake news, and people understand. The level of dishonesty in your profession is extremely high.
But the press covered the substance and the wording of that press conference accurately.
I don't care what they covered.
He doesn't care what they covered. And by the way, we still don't know, Sam Stein, what happened in that room for 2+ hours. We may never know what happened in that room, although there's senators trying to figure out. I just want to remind people, Dan Coats, Director of National Intelligence, twice in the last 6 days went out publicly to remind the American people.
He's part of as currently constituted.
That the warning signs are blinking red about Russian interference. And Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, yesterday in Aspen told Lester Holt the same, that my view has not changed one bit that Russia interfered in the 2016 election.
So two things. You say we don't know what happened in that room, and that's true. But it's not just us. There is a truly remarkable Washington Post story about how top officials in this current administration, DOD, Secretary of State, or State Department, I should say, simply don't know what kind of verbal agreements were struck between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. That is a really almost frightening thing to think about, where the people who implement policy are trying to figure out what the policy is.
It's not almost frightening.
It is frightening.
It's terrifying. The Russians say we are moving ahead to implement
we have no
the agreements that were made in this meeting that we know nothing about.
Didn't we just do the same thing with Kim Jong-un? I'm sorry, but here we are. This is deals with dictators part 2.
Exactly.
And the only proof that you need about how strong the president was in that meeting is the fact that Vladimir Putin emerged from it feeling seemingly having no pressure to say take any responsibility for what Russia did.
So now, hold on. The second thing I want to talk about was the piece you referenced in the Times is remarkable too. But I think in some ways, and I would like to throw this to Matt if possible, the meta story here is really crazy, which is clearly some of the intelligence that the New York Times got is highly sensitive, and the fact that it made its way into print suggests to me that people in the intel community have gone past their threshold of tolerance for what's going on here, that they're willing to actually reveal some of these methods which normally would not be made on a front page of a major newspaper. So Matt, as someone who's been in that world and that universe, as you read that piece and you saw some of the methods being described by the Times in terms of intelligence gathering, did that strike you as an interesting meta story about what's happening behind the scenes?
Yeah, it absolutely did. There were 2 key pieces of information in that story. One, the fact that the U.S. intelligence community had obtained texts and emails of senior Russian officials that made it clear that Putin was involved. And then 2, even more importantly, that there was a human source close to Vladimir Putin who was cooperating with the U.S. intelligence community and providing information that was key to this conclusion that Putin had directly ordered the intervention in the election. That is really the crown jewels of U.S. intelligence, and the fact that that made it out publicly was concerning to me. And I will say, after I read that story last night and found out that the president has known going back to a year and a half now about what exactly Vladimir Putin did, and he has helped him cover up that crime by lying about it publicly, and that he was continuing to help him cover up that crime by standing next to him on Monday and lying about it publicly, it made me wonder what happened in the meeting. And I bet it made U.S. intelligence officials wonder what happened in the meeting, why the president wanted to have that meeting all alone with no other officials there, not even his closest advisors. And I can't believe this is something I'm saying about the President of the United States, but it made me wonder if people are suspicious that he revealed sensitive classified intelligence, including human source information, to the President of the Russian Federation. That's a real concern that I had after reading that story.
And Matt, you're not the first person to raise that suspicion privately and publicly around this table. Matt, what is our best hope to find out what happened in that room exactly? There's some senators talking about trying to bring the interpreter before Congress to get a debrief on that. Is that reasonable? Is that likely? And if not, how else will we know what happened?
You know, it is a dramatic step that I think on any other occasion would be completely unwarranted. You can make a very good policy case for why the executive needs to be able to have confidential conversations with a foreign leader, and that an interpreter shouldn't be subject to oversight. But in this case, when the president's actions are under such a cloud, and when he's come out and helped Vladimir Putin cover up a crime, I mean, there's no other way to put it, then that's exactly what he's done. I think that interpreter ought to be subject to a subpoena from Congress. You ought to see Republicans joining that call. She ought to come up and testify privately, not publicly first, because a lot of this information would be sensitive and classified, but there needs to be some oversight so elected officials know exactly what he promised to President Putin and whether he did really violate his most sacred oath of office.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.